He was just driving. One road, one dog, one chance to change everything. It was 3 a.m. on a desert highway when he saw her, barefoot, bleeding, and smiling like she knew something the world had forgotten. Most would have passed. He stopped. Beside him, a German shepherd named Shadow, retired K-Non, trained for danger, but not for miracles. Ahead, a journey through storms, silence, broken hearts, and one boy who had nothing left but hope. This is not just a story, it's a reminder that sometimes all it takes is one stop, one bottle of water, one stranger, one dog, and what happened next will restore your faith in humanity. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments. And if you believe in signs, in grace, in the power of pausing for someone in need, hit subscribe. You won't forget this. Neither did he. The sky above northern New Mexico was a deep charcoal gray, holding in the heat like a lung refusing to exhale. It was past 3 a.m., and the desert never cooled, not in July. The wind was still. The night insects had gone quiet. Along Route 40, just east of the Arizona line, the land was flat and dry, broken only by crooked fences and long-forgotten billboards rusting in the dark. Jack Mullins had been on this road more times than he cared to count. At 52, with a Freightliner that rumbled like an old lion and a body worn thin from years behind the wheel, he preferred the solitude of night drives. No traffic, no small talk, just him, the stars, and the memories he couldn't shut off. He sat tall, thick-shouldered, with weathered hands wrapped loosely around the steering wheel. His grizzled hair curled slightly under his cap, and a few days' worth of stubble shadowed his jaw. His eyes, pale, gray-blue, stared ahead with a kind of quiet sadness. He didn't smoke, didn't drink, but he carried grief like others carried addiction. In the passenger seat lay a dog, massive, black and tan, eyes sharp as searchlights in the dark. Shadow, his 9-year-old German shepherd. Shadow had once served beside military police trained to detect explosives and chase down men with evil in their blood. But now, with a stiff leg and a deep scar across his left flank, he was retired, though no less alert. Jack never told anyone the real story behind Shadow's name. His late wife, Melody, used to call the dog "your Shadow" when he followed Jack through the house, garage, even to the shower door. But after cancer took her in a matter of months, the name became something else. Shadow became what was left, what stayed, what didn't leave him behind. The truck moved steadily along the stretch of empty road when something up ahead caught Jack's attention. A flicker, barely visible in the headlights. Not an animal, not roadkill, taller, upright. Jack leaned forward slightly, his grip tightening. At first, he thought it might be a lost hitchhiker or a hallucination brought on by too much caffeine and too little sleep. But as the truck crept closer, the figure became clear. A woman, standing alone at the edge of the asphalt, her right arm raised, not frantically, not begging, but almost greeting. Jack eased his foot off the pedal. She was barefoot, wearing a white cotton dress smeared with dust and something darker, dried blood. Her hair was long, tangled, and clung to her face like riverweed. She didn't flinch under the approaching lights. Her eyes, dark and calm, held the truck in their gaze. Shadow lifted his head, ears twitching. A low hum rose in his throat, not quite a growl. Jack noticed and murmured, "Easy, boy." The truck rolled to a stop a few feet away from the woman. Jack kept the engine running as he leaned toward the open window. "You all right, ma'am?" His voice was rough, but not unkind. The woman stepped closer, the gravel crunching under her feet. Up close, she looked to be in her 30s. Average height, thin but not fragile. Her skin was sun-worn, her cheekbones sharp, lips dry. But her presence was the strange thing. She didn't look lost. She looked placed, like she was meant to be there. "I'm thirsty," she said. Just 2 words. Calm. As if she'd been standing in silence for 100 years and only now decided to speak. Jack reached for the center console, pulled out a half-full bottle of water. He handed it out the window. She took it with both hands, as if receiving something sacred. "Thank you," she said. Then, after a pause, she added softly, "You're the only one who stopped." Jack blinked. Something in her voice hit a hollow place in him, one he hadn't touched in years. He opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out. Shadow stared at the woman, motionless now, the low rumble gone. The desert night wrapped around them again. She didn't ask for a ride. She didn't plead. She simply sipped the water, eyes fixed somewhere past Jack's shoulder. "Do you need help?" he finally asked, unsure why he did. The woman didn't answer. She just looked at him, not with desperation, but with knowing. Jack turned off the engine. The headlights dimmed slightly. The desert swallowed the sound. Shadow remained still, tail curled, eyes never leaving her. Jack looked back out at the woman. Her dress fluttered slightly in the breeze, revealing deep scratches on her legs. He didn't ask what had happened. Something told him it wasn't that kind of story. "I got a first aid kit in the back," he said. "Or a phone, if you need to call someone." She shook her head slowly. "I'm not calling anyone." Jack nodded, not sure what else to say. His instincts were trained for war, not whatever this was. Still, the stillness between them didn't feel wrong. It felt like a held breath, waiting. The woman looked down at the bottle, then at the dog. "What's his name?" she asked. "Shadow." Her eyes softened. "Of course it is." Jack blinked again. "What do you mean?" She didn't answer right away. Then she said, "Only those who've been in the dark know how to follow the light." Jack didn't know what that meant, but he knew this. He had stopped. For the first time in years, not just physically, but in his heart. He watched her one more time, uncertain whether to offer her a seat in the truck or wish her well and drive on. But before he could speak, Shadow, stoic, disciplined Shadow, moved. He stood up, slowly, deliberately, and placed his head on the edge of the open window, just inches from the woman's chest. He didn't growl, didn't bark, just stared at her, calm and present. Jack exhaled. He didn't need more signs. The chapter ended not with a word, but with a feeling. That something old had shifted. That the road ahead was no longer the same. Jack hesitated, his hand resting on the open window frame, eyes locked with the woman standing before him. The truck's engine murmured beneath them like a tired old man, and in the stillness of the desert night, even the wind seemed to pause. The bottle of water she had taken from him was now nearly empty, its label peeling in the heat. She cradled it like something precious. "You were the only one who stopped," she said again, softer this time, as if it was both an observation and a confession. Jack shifted in his seat. Those words slid under his ribs, hooked into something he didn't even know was still tender, something Melody used to say after one of his long hauls. "You show up when no one else does." "That's your gift, Jack." Shadow exhaled heavily from the passenger side, his ears twitching but his body relaxed. Jack glanced at the dog. He was watching her, steady, silent, unmoving, but not tense. That was strange. Shadow didn't trust people easily, not even the mailman back home. Yet now he looked almost accepting. The woman stepped closer, the gravel crunching softly beneath her bare feet. Jack opened the passenger door halfway without fully deciding to. It was instinct, habit, maybe hope. She paused, meeting his eyes. "My name is Grace," she said, her voice carrying a weight far older than her 30-something appearance suggested. Up close, her features were clearer, olive skin flushed from heat, dark eyes framed by thick lashes, her lips dry and cracked. The white dress hung loosely on her frame, stained at the hem and torn near one side. She had no bag, no shoes, no phone, no keys, just her and the silence. Jack nodded slowly, measuring his words. "You headed somewhere in particular, Grace?" She looked westward, toward the black ribbon of road disappearing into the horizon. "That way," she answered simply. "West." "That's pretty vague," Jack muttered, more to himself than to her. But his hand moved again, this time pushing the door fully open. "Hop in, at least until we get you somewhere safer." Grace didn't smile, not exactly, but her expression softened. She looked down at Shadow, who now stood up on all fours, ears alert but not bristling. Grace extended a hand, slow, open-palmed. Shadow hesitated, then stepped forward and gently touched his nose to her fingers. The dog sat down and wagged his tail once. It was not a greeting of excitement, but recognition. Jack blinked. That had never happened before. Grace reached out and, with surprising gentleness, placed a hand on Shadow's head. He tilted his head slightly into her touch, as if he knew her, or someone like her. "He's beautiful," she whispered. strong, but tired. Jack didn't answer. He watched the moment unfold as though it wasn't real, as though something was taking place beyond his comprehension. Grace climbed into the cab, settling beside Shadow. She didn't fidget or clutch her dress nervously like most strangers might. She sat with composure, folding her hands on her lap, her feet tucked beneath her, careful not to touch the gear console. Shadow lay back down beside her and rested his head near her thigh, eyes closing halfway. Jack closed the door gently and started the truck again. The dashboard lights glowed dim orange. The headlights stretched across the road ahead, cutting through the darkness like an old sword. "You always walk around in the middle of nowhere like that?" he asked as they pulled back onto the highway. Grace looked ahead through the windshield. "Only when I need to be found." Jack frowned. "That doesn't make any damn sense." "Maybe not to you," she said softly. Shadow stirred slightly at the change in Jack's tone, but Grace gently touched the dog's neck, and he stilled again. The miles began to pass in silence. The hum of the engine and the low static of the old AM radio filled the space. Jack didn't press for details. He had the feeling that pushing her would be like trying to force a door that only opened from the inside. After 10 minutes, Grace broke the quiet. "Why did you stop, Jack?" He tightened his grip on the wheel. "Guess I'm not the kind of man who passes by someone like that." "Not anymore," she replied. Jack turned his head slightly. "Excuse me? You used to be different, harder, closed off. But you're not anymore. That's why you stopped." Jack said nothing. The dashboard clock read 3:31 a.m. The road ahead was smooth, the sky darkening further. Not even the coyotes howled. He cleared his throat. "You seem to know a lot about someone you just met." "I know what pain looks like," she said. "I can see it in your eyes, and in his." She nodded down at Shadow. The dog made a soft groan and shifted his head closer to her. Grace continued. "Dogs carry our pain. They don't show it, but they feel it, especially the old souls." Jack stared ahead. Something about her words, her certainty, unnerved him. Not in a frightening way, but in a deeply personal one. After another mile, Jack asked, "You hungry?" Grace shook her head. "Thirst was the only thing I needed." "Well," he muttered, "you got that. I reckon I'll drop you off at the diner in Farmington when we hit it at sunrise." She didn't respond. She simply stared out at the empty stretch of road, her face unreadable. Shadow remained pressed against her leg, his breathing even, relaxed. The first time he had done that with anyone since Melody. The road carried them west. Behind them, the place where they had met slowly disappeared into the dark, as if it had never been there. But Jack knew better. Something had begun, something he couldn't name yet, but it started with a bottle of water, and a woman named Grace. The asphalt gave way to gravel, and gravel gave way to dust. Jack didn't remember making the turn, but somehow the headlights were now casting long shadows across a narrow dirt road, the kind that led to forgotten ranches or dried-up creek beds. "This wasn't on the map," Jack muttered, one hand still on the wheel, the other resting on the gear shift like it was an anchor. Grace sat beside him, still and upright, her gaze fixed ahead. "Sometimes the road finds you," she said, voice calm as ever. Shadow stirred in the back seat, though the dog typically stayed curled near the gear console or lay with his head by the window. Now he sat upright, ears twitching, nose lifted. Jack noticed the subtle change. Shadow's breathing was sharper, nostrils flaring. Then came a sound Jack hadn't heard from him in a long time. A whimper, soft but urgent. The road curved around a cluster of mesquite trees. Beyond it, the land dipped gently into a small basin, the moonlight painting the sand silver. Jack slowed the truck to a crawl. "What's he picking up?" he asked. Grace didn't answer immediately. She placed her hand gently on Shadow's neck. "He smells pain," she whispered. Shadow let out a low, almost mournful moan, and then he pawed at the door. Jack stopped the truck. Grace opened the door before Jack could say a word. Shadow jumped down gracefully, despite his age, landing with a soft thud. His posture was alert but not aggressive. Grace stepped out barefoot onto the soft sand, her white dress rippling in the slight breeze. Jack followed, his boots crunching the loose gravel. The night was unusually quiet. Even the insects had gone still. Shadow moved ahead, nose to the ground, tail stiff and level. Then he froze, just beyond a low rise of sand. Jack moved beside him and looked down. A child lay crumpled near a patch of yucca. Barefoot, dressed in a faded red t-shirt and 2 large jeans, maybe 10 years old at most. His legs were scratched, and his right ankle was swollen badly. His face, half buried in his arms, was smeared with dirt and dried tears. He wasn't crying now. He wasn't moving. Grace stepped forward, her voice still, her movements slow. She knelt beside the child, brushing his dusty hair from his forehead. The boy's skin was warm, but pale. "His name is Sam," she said without hesitation. Jack blinked. "You know him?" Grace didn't answer. She leaned down and placed her lips near the boy's ear. Her words were barely audible, not English, not Spanish, something older. A murmur that seemed to vibrate through the sand. Jack wanted to ask what she was doing, but the words caught in his throat. Shadow stood at her side, eyes fixed on the child, ears lowered in concern. The dog made another soft sound, like a deep breath that trembled at the end. Then, slowly, Sam stirred. His fingers twitched first, then his chest rose and fell with a sudden, gasping breath. He opened his eyes, wide, dark, filled with confusion and fear. "It's okay," Grace said gently. "You're safe." The boy tried to sit up but winced. Jack knelt beside him. "Don't move too fast, kid," he said, his voice unusually soft. "That ankle looks bad." Sam looked at Jack, then at Grace, then at Shadow. The dog's face was close to his now, his breath warm and steady. Sam's hand reached out instinctively, resting gently on Shadow's head. Grace helped steady the boy into a seated position. "You've been here a while," she said. "Where's your family?" Sam shook his head. "I don't know. I think I ran. Or fell. It was dark. I just kept walking." His voice was raspy, like he hadn't spoken in days. Jack stood and scanned the empty land around them. No houses, no lights, no sign of a car or another road. "He didn't just wander here," he said. "This place is miles from anywhere." Sam clung to Shadow like a child to a security blanket. "Is he yours?" he asked. Jack glanced down at the dog. "Yeah, name's Shadow." Sam smiled faintly, wincing again as he adjusted his leg. "He found me." Grace smiled faintly. "No, you called him and he heard." Jack sighed, running a hand through his hair. "All right, let's get him in the truck. That ankle needs looking at, and we're too far out to sit here waiting for someone to show up." He lifted the boy gently. Sam was lighter than he should have been, and carried him back to the truck. Shadow stayed close, his body pressed against Jack's leg the entire way. Grace walked silently beside them, arms loosely folded, eyes on Sam the entire time. They laid Sam across the back seat, his injured leg propped on a folded blanket. Shadow leapt in beside him without hesitation. Jack got behind the wheel again, his chest heavy. Grace closed the door and settled into the passenger seat. As the truck rolled forward again onto the dirt path, Sam whispered, "I didn't think anyone would find me." Grace turned to look at him. Sometimes, being found is only the beginning. The boy's eyes drifted closed. Exhaustion overtook fear. Jack drove in silence. Shadow didn't sleep. He lay awake beside the boy, one paw lightly resting on Sam's chest. Grace looked ahead, her expression unreadable. The road would take them back to the highway, but none of them would be the same. The headlights flickered across a bent metal sign half buried in weeds. Mesa Ridge Gas and Auto, last stop for 30 miles. The letters were faded, sun-bleached, and cracked. The station looked like it hadn't seen a working pump in decades. Its single-story concrete building leaned slightly, windows grimy with sand and time. A busted air compressor sat rusting near the entrance, its hose coiled like a dead snake. The moon hung high and lonely, casting long silver shadows across the lot. Jack pulled the truck alongside the crumbling curb and killed the engine. The silence that followed was immense, broken only by the soft ticking of the cooling motor. Grace didn't say a word. She stepped out barefoot and walked slowly toward the building, dress fluttering slightly in the warm desert wind. Jack opened the rear door and gently helped Sam sit up. The boy's leg was still swollen, but he didn't complain. He leaned into Jack's shoulder with a quiet kind of trust, raw, unspoken. Shadow jumped down from the truck and circled to Sam's side. The dog sniffed once, then walked ahead, tail held steady, posture alert but not tense. Jack had learned to watch the dog before anything else. If Shadow walked forward, it meant the place wasn't dangerous, at least not in a way a dog could smell. The inside of the gas station was ghost silent. A few metal shelves stood lopsided, mostly bare except for dusty cans of soup and mouse-chewed snack wrappers. The air smelled of rust, sand, and old rubber. Behind the counter was a stool with torn vinyl, and against the far wall, a wooden bench with flaking green paint. Grace went to the bench and wiped it down with her sleeve. "He can rest here," she said softly. Jack nodded and carried Sam inside, careful not to jar the boy's ankle. Shadow entered last, nose twitching, then curled under the bench as Sam lay down. The boy was asleep within minutes, his breath even, his fingers resting on Shadow's back like they'd been doing it all their life. Grace sat on the floor beside them, legs folded neatly, eyes half closed. Jack leaned against the counter and exhaled, the weight of the night pressing into his spine. Outside, a warm breeze rustled through the broken pumps. The old neon sign above the roof sputtered once, then went dark again. Inside, time seemed to stretch. Jack glanced at the shattered clock on the wall, its hands frozen at 11:14. He didn't know why, but that detail stuck with him. He found himself pacing quietly, his boots whispering across the concrete floor. His eyes drifted to the back room, where broken glass covered the floor and a dusty cross still hung crooked above a doorway. A sign read, "Employees must wash hands. God is watching." That phrase dug at something in Jack. He hadn't stepped inside a church since Melody's funeral. 5 years ago, under a rain-black sky, he'd stood next to a pine box and felt like the entire world had collapsed inward. Melody had been the one with the faith. She prayed for Jack even when he laughed it off. She lit candles for soldiers, for stray dogs, for strangers she heard about on the news. After she died, Jack didn't light anything. He just drove, and never stopped long enough to feel the silence catch up. Grace's voice broke the hush. "You've been carrying pain that doesn't belong to you." Jack turned slowly. She hadn't opened her eyes. She sat in stillness, like she'd always been there. He cleared his throat. "I lost my wife, 5 years back." Grace nodded gently. "Yes, but that pain, it grew roots. It started feeding on other things, regret, guilt, distance." Jack didn't respond. His jaw tightened. "You don't just miss her," Grace said, opening her eyes now. "You blame yourself." "I was on the road," Jack said finally. "I wasn't there at the end. She called. I was stuck in a blizzard near Cheyenne. I missed her last breath by 4 hours." Silence fell again. Grace didn't say, "It's not your fault." She didn't say anything comforting, really. She just sat there, still, listening. And for the first time, Jack realized that's what he'd needed all along. Not someone to fix it, just someone to bear witness to it. He sat down on the floor near the door. Shadow shifted slightly under Sam, but didn't move away. "You think this is all happening for a reason?" Jack asked, eyes on the cracked ceiling. Grace didn't answer right away. "I think some roads are meant to be walked twice," she said. "Once in pain, and again in purpose." Jack stared at her. Her eyes reflected the pale light from the cracked window. They weren't extraordinary eyes, but they held no fear, no expectation. Outside, a coyote howled, distant, but real. Inside, Shadow stirred and lifted his head briefly. Then he rested it again beside Sam. Grace stood slowly, stretching her arms over her head. She looked like someone who had slept under the stars for years, like someone who knew the weight of wind and silence. Jack noticed for the first time the faint white scars along her forearm. Thin, deliberate, old. Whatever story they told, she wasn't offering it. She moved to the back room and came out with a metal basin. There's still a spigot in the washroom. Water's slow but clean. Jack took the basin wordlessly, filled it, and returned. He dampened a rag and gently wiped the dirt from Sam's forehead. The boy didn't wake. Shadow licked the boy's hand once and returned to his silent vigil. The moonlight spilled through the cracked front windows now, falling across the floor like a spotlight. Grace walked toward it and stood in the glow. Jack watched her, uncertain whether to ask the question or not. "Why were you on that road?" he said at last. Grace turned her face slightly toward him. "Because you were." And then she sat again, in the light, as if it were a place she had always known. The desert doesn't whisper warnings. It screams them in silence. The morning began with the smell of dampness, not the fresh, earthy kind, but something heavier, older, the kind of scent that settles into bones long before clouds show up. Jack had just merged back onto the main highway, the sun still low behind a curtain of gray clouds. The sky was losing its blue. Ahead, it rippled with distant thunder, the kind that promised rain would come all at once or not at all. In the passenger seat, Grace sat quietly, fingers tracing the edge of her sleeve. She hadn't spoken since they left the abandoned station, but her presence filled the cab like a quiet hum. Sam, still drowsy from the night before, lay in the back seat with his leg propped up. Shadow sat upright beside him, alert but calm. They were approaching a bend in the road, Route 117, somewhere between two towns that had died long ago. The pavement darkened under their tires as the first drops of rain began to fall. "Slow down," Grace said suddenly, her voice sharp enough to slice through the low growl of the engine. Jack instinctively eased off the gas. "What is it?" "There's something ahead." Before Jack could ask what she meant, Shadow let out a sharp bark. Then another. His hackles rose, eyes locked forward. He barked again, this time louder. A warning, not just a reaction. Jack's eyes snapped toward the curve just ahead. From around the blind turn, a black SUV burst into view, fishtailing wildly on the slick road. It was going too fast, swerving across both lanes, tires squealing. Jack's reflexes kicked in. He jerked the wheel, narrowly avoiding a head-on collision. But that's when he saw her. A small figure, no more than 8 years old, stood frozen at the edge of the road, soaked to the skin, her yellow raincoat flapping like a flag. Her hair was plastered to her forehead, eyes wide and terrified. She didn't move, not even to scream. The SUV spun past her, missing her by inches, skidding into the shoulder before slamming into a ditch. Jack slammed the brakes and brought the truck to a skidding stop. Before he could unbuckle, Shadow had already leapt from the back seat and was sprinting toward the girl. Jack followed, his boots splashing through the puddles. The girl had dropped to her knees, hands trembling. Her name was Lila. Jack would find that out later. But now, she was just a child alone in a storm. She stared up at the approaching figures, soaked and stunned. Shadow reached her first. He slowed as he neared, lowering his body and lying down beside her, his head resting gently on her thigh. She didn't flinch. Instead, she wrapped her arms around the dog's neck and held on like she was drowning. Jack crouched next to her, lowering his voice. "Hey there, sweetie. You okay? Where's your family?" Lila didn't answer. Her lips trembled, but no sound came out. Shadow let out a low, comforting whine, the kind he used to use when Melody was sick. Grace arrived moments later, her face unreadable in the rain. She placed a hand on Lila's back, offering silent reassurance. "She's in shock," Grace said. "We need to get her warm." Jack nodded and lifted the girl into his arms. She was light, too light, as if fear had hollowed her out from the inside. Back in the truck, Sam scooted over to make room. Grace wrapped a dry blanket around Lila's shoulders while Jack handed her a half-full thermos of warm tea. She held it with both hands but didn't drink. Jack pulled out his phone. Still no signal. "I'll try the emergency channel," he muttered, switching on the CB radio. The static buzzed through the cab. "A mayday, mayday, this is Freightliner 28 on Route 117. Child found near the westbound curve. Possible vehicle crash. Requesting immediate assistance." There was a long pause, then a crackle. "Copy that, 28. Local deputy, en route. ETA 12 minutes. Over." Jack exhaled and set the mic down. Sam looked at Lila, then at Shadow, who hadn't moved from her side. "Is she gonna be okay?" he asked. Grace nodded. "She already is." Lila slowly looked up at Grace, then at Jack, then back at Shadow. Her fingers curled deeper into his fur. Jack studied the SUV in the distance. It had settled against a rocky embankment. Steam hissed from the hood, but the driver had apparently already run, or was unconscious. Either way, it would be the sheriff's problem now. 10 minutes later, the red and blue lights of a patrol car appeared in the rearview mirror. Deputy Ellis was a young man with sandy hair and a round face that hadn't yet hardened from too many bad days. He took one look at Lila and lowered his voice. "She's been missing since this morning," he said, glancing down at the report on his phone. "Wandered off from a family camping site a few miles up north. Folks have been searching all day. We thought—" He didn't finish the sentence. Lila looked at the deputy and finally whispered, "Can Shadow come with me?" Jack smiled gently. "He's got to stay with us, sweetheart, but he'll watch you go." Lila nodded slowly. Before getting into the patrol car, she turned and hugged the dog one last time. Shadow leaned into it, his tail thumping softly against the ground. The rain was beginning to let up, tapering into mist. As the patrol car drove away, Sam turned to Jack. She didn't even cry. "No," Jack said. "Some kids don't need to. The world already cried enough for them." Back in the truck, Grace looked over at Jack. "You were meant to be there." Jack started the engine, staring out the windshield at the wet road ahead. "You think everything's meant?" Grace didn't answer directly. She looked at Shadow, who was now back on the floor, eyes closed but ears still twitching. "Sometimes," she said softly, "the world puts broken things in the path of those who know what it's like to be broken." Jack nodded. He didn't understand everything she said, but something about it felt right. They drove on, with one less soul lost in the storm. The rain had given way to sun, but the clouds hadn't left. They drifted over the sky like forgotten thoughts, thick, slow-moving, unresolved. Jack kept his hands firm on the wheel as the truck rolled through the outskirts of a town he hadn't seen in nearly 7 years. The sign read, "Welcome to Dry Creek," though nothing about it felt welcoming. The buildings were smaller than he remembered. The gas station on the corner was gone, replaced by a boarded-up vape shop. The grocery store where Melody used to buy peaches was now a payday loan office. But some things hadn't changed. The high school football field still had one working goalpost, and the same faded mural, "Home of the Dry Creek Cougars," still peeled above the bleachers. Grace sat beside him in silence, her eyes scanning the town like she was reading a story only she could understand. In the back seat, Sam had fallen asleep again, his head tilted toward the window. Shadow lay with his eyes half open, his ears twitching at every familiar scent that crept in through the cracked windows. Jack took a slow breath and reached into the glove compartment. From a pile of crumpled papers and gas receipts, he pulled out a small, folded envelope. It was yellowed, corners bent, but still sealed. On the front, written in bold block letters, "To Ethan, from Dad." Grace turned slightly, her voice low. "You never mailed it." Jack didn't answer. He stared ahead as they rolled past a hardware store that used to belong to his best friend. It was closed now. "No," he said finally. "I wrote it the night I buried her. But I couldn't send it. Didn't have the guts." "You still have time," she said, "but only if you use it." Jack turned onto a side street, his jaw tight. The street was lined with pickup trucks, sun-bleached mailboxes, and front yards overgrown with weeds. Halfway down, he spotted the place. Earl's Auto and Tire, a squat brick building with a tin roof and a sign that tilted slightly to one side. Jack hadn't spoken to Earl in years, but he wasn't here for Earl. The garage doors were open. Inside, a young man knelt by the front wheel of a lifted Silverado, hands covered in grease, a socket wrench in one hand. He wore a backwards ball cap, sweat staining the collar of his blue work shirt. The name on the patch stitched across the chest said Ethan. Jack pulled over but didn't get out immediately. His throat was dry. Shadow stood up and pressed his nose to the window, ears perked. Then something strange happened. The dog let out a low whine, then wagged his tail once. Just once. Jack looked back at him, startled. "What is it, boy?" Shadow pawed at the door. Jack opened it, and the German Shepherd leapt down, not with the slow, careful movement of a tired old dog, but with purpose. He crossed the street, nose down, tracking. Jack grabbed the envelope and followed, heart pounding. Ethan didn't look up right away. He wiped his hands on a rag and reached for a torque wrench. Shadow trotted to the edge of the garage, stopped, and sat. His ears flicked, and he tilted his head. Ethan finally noticed. "Whoa," he said, taking a step back. "Hey there, buddy. You lost?" Jack cleared his throat. Ethan turned and froze. Father and son looked at each other. 7 years of silence hung between them like fog. Jack's hair was more silver now, his shoulders heavier. Ethan's face had hardened, jawline more defined, cheekbones sharper. But the eyes were the same, gray-blue, storm-dark, wary. Ethan was 26 now, tall like Jack, with Melody's smile when it showed. But it didn't show now. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice flat. Jack held out the envelope. "I came to give you this." Ethan didn't take it at first. He stared at it like it might explode. "You had 7 years to show up," he said. 7 years and not even a call. I know, Jack replied, voice low. I don't have an excuse, just this letter. It's not enough, but it's real. Ethan reached out, hand trembling slightly, and took it. He didn't open it. He looked at Shadow instead. This your dog? He asked. Jack nodded. Name's Shadow. He was Melody's favorite. Ethan knelt and extended a hand. Shadow sniffed it, then, without hesitation, pressed his nose into Ethan's palm and wagged his tail again. Ethan's face flickered with something like recognition. I used to play fetch with him in the backyard, he murmured. He was just a pup. Jack smiled faintly. He remembers. They stood in silence. The sound of cicadas buzzed in the distance, mixing with the soft clang of tools from inside the garage. Grace had remained by the truck, watching from across the street. She didn't move, didn't interrupt. Ethan looked at the letter again. I don't know if I'm ready to read this, he said. Jack shrugged. That's okay. It'll wait. Shadow circled once and sat between them, his tail gently brushing the concrete. After a pause, Ethan asked, You heading somewhere? Jack looked back toward the truck. West. Ethan nodded. Always west with you. Jack chuckled dryly. Yeah, guess I'm still running. You stopping? Jack met his son's eyes. Trying to. Another silence passed, but this one didn't feel as heavy. Ethan tucked the letter into his back pocket and wiped his hands again. You want some water? The air compressor's down, but the fridge still works.
Jack exhaled. Water sounds good.
They walked into the garage together, Shadow trotting just behind. Across the street, Grace leaned her head back against the seat and closed her eyes. The truck waited in the sun, and inside, Sam stirred from sleep, smiling faintly, as if he'd dreamed something good. The land began to rise as they drove west, the flat dust roads giving way to soft slopes of golden scrub and sandstone. It was early morning, too early for birdsong, too late for stars. A silver haze wrapped the horizon, and the light of dawn pressed gently on the ridges of the hills like a hand smoothing rumpled cloth. The truck rumbled slowly up the incline, its engine low and steady. Jack said nothing. Grace hadn't spoken since they left Dry Creek. In the back seat, Sam leaned against the window, his leg now wrapped more carefully in clean gauze, eyes heavy from sleep. Shadow lay beside him, watching the road ahead through half-lidded eyes, as if he knew something was coming, but didn't want to say it out loud. They reached the crest of the hill, a wide turnout overlooking a valley soaked in mist. The wind shifted. Cooler, calmer. Grace looked at Jack and placed her hand gently on the dashboard. This is it, she said. Jack downshifted, brought the truck to a halt, and turned off the engine. The silence that followed was deep, not empty, but whole. Grace opened the door and stepped out barefoot, her dress whispering around her ankles. She walked to the edge of the overlook, standing where the earth fell away and the sky began. Jack followed her with his eyes, hands still gripping the steering wheel, knuckles white. What do you mean, this is it? He asked. Grace turned back, the wind brushing her dark hair across her face. My part of this road ends here. Jack climbed out slowly, his boots crunching against gravel. You're not serious. I've been serious the whole time, she said, a soft smile playing at the corners of her mouth. You just didn't believe me. Jack didn't reply. Instead, Shadow jumped down from the truck and approached her. The old dog walked without hesitation, not a limp in his stride. He stopped in front of Grace and looked up. She knelt slowly, placing both hands on his head. Her fingers moved gently through his fur, and for a long moment, nothing else in the world seemed to breathe. You carried more than your share, she whispered to Shadow, and you never once complained. The dog closed his eyes as she leaned forward, pressing her forehead lightly to his. Then she looked over her shoulder at Jack. You chose to stop. You chose to listen. You chose love. I didn't do anything special, Jack muttered, his voice breaking more than he meant it to. Grace stood. That's what makes it special. Behind them, the door of the truck creaked open. Sam had climbed out, leaning slightly on the edge for balance. He looked confused, still half asleep. The wind pushed his curls back from his forehead. Is she leaving? He asked. Jack looked at Grace, then back at the boy. Yeah, he said softly. Sam took a few steps forward, squinting into the sunrise. Who is she? Jack hesitated. Then he said simply, She's the reason we still believe. Sam didn't ask more. He didn't need to. Grace began walking, not down a path. There was no trail where she went. just soft grass, dew-covered, and morning light. Each step seemed to blend her more into the earth, the sky, the pale gold of the day. No goodbye, no dramatic turn of the head, just presence, and then absence. Shadow remained standing where she'd left him. Then he turned slowly and walked back to Jack's side. Jack stood there a moment longer, eyes fixed on the point where she had vanished, trying to hold something intangible in his chest, like trying to remember the shape of a dream right before it slips away. He finally exhaled. Sam walked up beside him, leaning lightly on his good leg. "Do you think we'll see her again?" Jack placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "If we don't, we'll still remember." The wind moved again, warmer now, rustling the dry grass at their feet. Jack turned back toward the truck. Shadow trotted beside him, ears perked, posture calm. Sam climbed in slowly, careful with his leg, and Shadow returned to his place next to him like nothing had changed. But everything had. Jack took the wheel, looked once more toward the horizon, and started the engine. The truck rumbled to life, not as loud as before, somehow softer. They rolled forward, leaving the hill behind. No one said a word. They didn't need to. The road home was quieter than Jack remembered, not because the land had changed, but because he had. The truck moved smoothly along the two-lane highway that threaded through the hills like a ribbon gently tied around something sacred. The sky was a crisp blue, the kind of blue that only appears after a storm has cleaned everything beneath it. Sam sat in the back seat, dozing, his head resting against the glass, while Shadow lay curled beside him, ears twitching at the sound of each passing gust of wind. Jack drove with one hand on the wheel and the other resting on his thigh. He wasn't thinking about where he was going, not in the usual sense. He was just driving, letting the road carry him, letting the silence stretch into something more than absence. They passed a small diner, a half-burnt barn, an old tire swing still hanging from a crooked oak. Then, just past mile marker 82, Jack saw them. A silver Buick was pulled to the side of the road, one of its rear tires completely shredded. The hood was propped open, steam rising faintly from the engine. Behind it stood a man in his 70s, tall but slightly hunched, with a khaki windbreaker zipped up tight despite the heat. His face was lined with years, hair a wispy gray, and his hands trembled as he tried to unscrew the radiator cap. A few feet away, seated on a large rock under the sparse shade of a scraggly tree, was a woman of similar age. Petite, with short silver hair and deep-set hazel eyes, she held a small paper fan in one hand and a bottle of nearly empty water in the other. Her blouse clung to her back from sweat, but her expression was calm, resigned even. Jack slowed down without thinking. Shadow sat up. The truck came to a stop on the gravel shoulder. Jack stepped out, adjusting his cap, and called, "Y'all all right?" The old man looked up, startled, then quickly shook his head. "Tire blew out. Engine's overheated. We've been stuck here for near an hour. Cell service cuts out in these hills." Jack approached, peering under the hood. "Looks like the radiator's dry. You try refilling it?" The man gave a sheepish shrug. "Only had the one bottle. We didn't expect to break down." Jack walked back to the truck and returned with a gallon jug from his supply box. He poured it carefully into the reservoir while the old man steadied the funnel. Shadow stayed beside the woman under the tree, sitting upright like a sentinel. She looked down at him and smiled faintly. "You're a good boy," she whispered, stroking the top of his head. "You remind me of one we had named Scout, years ago." Shadow didn't move, just kept his eyes on the horizon. The man sighed as Jack lowered the hood. "Should be all right once it cools. Tire's a mess, though. I've got a jack and a spare in the back. It's not perfect, but it'll get you to the next town," Jack said. The old man blinked. "You sure?" Jack nodded. "It's just sitting back there. Better it helps someone." The man extended a weathered hand. Russell McKinney. Jack Mullins." The woman stood slowly, dusting off her skirt. "And I'm June," she said. "And I just want to say, thank you. I didn't think anyone would stop." Jack gave a soft, crooked smile. "I used to think that way too. Then one day, someone stopped for me." She looked at him closely, as if searching for a deeper meaning, but Jack didn't elaborate. He changed the tire with Russell's help, while June poured cold water from his cooler onto a small cloth and dabbed her forehead. Sam eventually woke and offered to hold tools, which earned him a grateful smile from Russell. When it was all done, the Buick started on the first turn. Russell clapped Jack's shoulder. "You're a good man," he said. Jack simply nodded. They watched the Buick pull away down the long stretch of road until the dust cloud faded. Jack walked back to the truck. Shadow hadn't moved from his place by the tree. He sat perfectly still, eyes fixed on the eastern sky where the sun had now fully risen. Jack crouched beside him. "You still looking for her?" he asked softly. Shadow didn't move. Jack followed his gaze, out across the fields, toward the pale place where land met light. Nothing moved out there. No figure in white, no footprints in the dust, just wind. And still, Shadow watched. Jack stood and placed a hand on the dog's head. "I don't know if she's coming back either," he said, "but I hope she knows you waited." They climbed back into the truck. Sam was humming softly in the back, a tune Jack didn't recognize, the kind of sound kids make when they feel safe. Jack turned the key. The engine rumbled back to life. Before shifting into drive, he glanced into the rearview mirror. The place where Grace had vanished 2 mornings ago was still far behind them. But for the first time in a long time, Jack didn't feel like he was running from anything. He was moving towards something. The road stretched out before him, open, endless, and waiting. Sometimes, the greatest miracles don't come with thunder or lightning. They come quietly, through a man who stops his truck, through a woman who walks into our lives like a whisper, through a loyal dog who waits by the roadside for someone who may never return. Jack thought he was lost, a broken man with a broken past. But when he chose to stop, when he chose to see, listen, and care, he opened the door for something divine to step in. Maybe Grace wasn't just a woman. Maybe she was an answer, a sign, a gift from God to remind us all that even in the darkest desert, love can bloom again. And Shadow, faithful, patient, silent, was the bridge between the seen and the unseen, the kind of soul that doesn't need words to say, "You're not alone." Here's the truth. In life, we all pass someone on the side of the road. Some are easy to ignore, but some are angels in disguise. And sometimes, you are the miracle someone is praying for. If this story touched you, share it with someone who needs hope. If you've ever been saved by a moment of kindness, or if you believe God sends people at just the right time, hit that subscribe button, leave a comment, and help this story travel further than any truck ever could. Drop a comment below that simply says, "Amen," because somewhere out there, someone needs to read it and remember, miracles are still real. And sometimes they wear dusty boots and sit beside old dogs.